Please open to the Do Now section of your notebook and write down your I can statement. Today's I can statement is I can write compound complex sentences. What I'd like for you to do is I'd like you to imagine that you're writing a story about a haunted house. Please write down 3 complex sentences about that haunted house. Be sure to use a variety of complex sentences. That means I'd like for you to use a DC, IC and also an IC DC. When you are done, please go ahead and start the video again. All right, so here are 3 complex sentences that I wrote about a haunted house. I'm going to go ahead and highlight our subordinated conjunctions. The house has been haunted ever since the woman was mysteriously found dead. Ever since are subordinated conjunctions. After she was found murdered in her home, the family sold the house to a local millionaire. Here our subordinated conjunction is after. Since it starts our sentence, we must have a comma. The millionaire bought the home since the land was worth more than the house. Here we have our subordinated conjunction of since. So let's quickly review some of the things that we've already talked about this year. So what's a simple sentence? Well, a simple sentence is one independent clause. You're going to be thinking to yourself, well, what is an independent clause? An independent clause has a subject and a predicate. Please remember that a predicate is just a fancy word for a verb. A compound sentence. A compound sentence is 2 independent clauses. So it's 2 simple sentences combined using a comma, coordinating conjunction, or a semicolon. What are our coordinating conjunctions? Well, those are fanboys, for and nor, but, or, yet, so. And then finally, we talked a lot about complex sentences. Please remember that a complex sentence is 1 independent clause and 1 dependent clause. So you may think to yourself, well, I understand that an independent clause has a subject and a verb, but what makes something dependent? Please remember that your dependent clause has a subject and it also has a verb, but there is a subordinating conjunction at the beginning of that clause. So it's after, a while, since. That subordinating conjunction makes that clause dependent. So today what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about compound complex sentences. And it sounds exactly, or it is exactly what it sounds. Here we have a sentence that combines a compound sentence and also combines that complex sentence. So if we look down here, you're going to see that it's simply just 2 independent clauses and it's 1 dependent clause. So if we were going to think of a baby and a mother and their relationship, we know that the mother is independent, and the baby is dependent. The baby relies on the mother, whereas the mother can stand on her own. So if we were going to look at this particular formula, we could have 2 independent clauses in the beginning of our sentence and then end with a dependent clause. What we could also do is we could have the dependent clause actually start our sentence and then have our sentence end with 2 independent clauses. Or we could even have the sentence start with an independent clause, then have a dependent clause right in the middle, and then end with another independent clause. So let's actually look at some examples of compound complex sentences. So let's go and scroll this up. If we were going to look here we have DC, IC, IC. Now please remember the same rules are going to follow with this. Because our dependent clauses in the beginning, we're going to have that comma there. And also because this is a compound sentence, we have to have a comma there too. So while I was playing in the snow, comma, my mother baked cookies, comma, and my brother did his homework. Now we could also have an IC, IC, DC. Now remember, we're going to need a comma here because it's just a compound sentence, but we do not need to have a comma here because our dependent clause is at the end of our sentence. So an example would be, and it's exactly the same sentence above, My mother baked cookies, comma, and my brother did his homework while I played in the snow. So if we're looking here, we see that comma coordinating conjunction. Here's our subordinating conjunction, but we don't need any punctuation. And then finally, we have an IC. So notice here that, yeah, there's still a comma. Well, why is there a comma there? That doesn't seem to kind of follow any rule. You just have to kind of pretend that this dependent clause isn't there. This comma is still needed to combine these independent clauses together. So an example would be my mother baked cookies while I was playing in the snow, and my brother did his homework. So here we see that comma coordinating conjunction. All right, so what do we notice? Okay, that the compound complex sentence will have at least one subordinating conjunction and at least one coordinating conjunction. All right, so what I'd like for you to do here in your notebook is I'd like for you to look at these sentences, and I'd like you to decide where is the independent clause and where is the dependent clause. You can go ahead and write this in your notebook. All right, so if we look at our first sentence, here we have, although I like to go camping, we know that's dependent because here we have a subordinated conjunction, which means we're going to have this comma. Here's our next independent clause, I haven't had time to go. Again, we're going to need a comma here because here's our coordinated conjunction. I haven't been able to find anyone to go with me is our last independent clause. Our next sentence looks like this. We decided the movie was too violent, and then we combine with a comma coordinated conjunction our next independent clause. Our children thought we were wrong. And then here we have our dependent clause because here's our subordinated conjunction because they like to watch scary movies. And finally, let's look at our last example. I usually use a pick whenever I play guitar, but today I'll just use my fingers. Okay. So if we look at this particular sentence, here we see our subordinated conjunction in the middle of our sentence, and we know that we're not going to need a comma there. And then here we have a coordinated conjunction with the comma before it. And again, the reason we have that is because we have an independent clause here and an independent clause over here. All right, so what I'd like for you to do right now is I want you to do some practice. Go ahead and go back to your do now. And I want you to add another independent clause to your complex sentence. So what this is going to do is it's going to make those sentences that you wrote earlier a compound complex sentence, but it's also going to add more detail and make that sentence more complex. So go ahead and practice doing that and pause the video. All right, now what you're going to do is you're going to write a story of 3 to 5 paragraphs, and the story needs to have a beginning, middle, and end, so therefore it needs to have at least 3 paragraphs about the following picture. I'd like you to use a variety of compound complex sentences and highlight those sentences in yellow. When you are done, please come over and confer with me. After you see the picture, you can go ahead and pause the video. All right, after conferring with me, I'd like you to come back and I'd like you to write me another story again of 3 to 5 paragraphs about the following picture. I want you focusing on writing compound complex sentences. Please highlight these in yellow, and when you're done, please come over and confer with me.